Welcome to the Scottish Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host Chris, and here we'll be delving into a multitude of strange occurrences that happen with us on and beyond. You can contact us with your accounts at the Scottish Paranormal Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on all social media channels, and you can contact us by either means. Tonight's episode, we're discussing the Black Lady of Broomhill with Helen, Moir and John Milligan. This story, like others like it, so just a bit of backstory to some stories like this, but you'll see the difference in this one, where some towns and cities throughout Scotland, or places, and even the world as it be, have got stories or folklore tales of a ghost story of a grey lady, a green lady, a black lady, a red lady, and there's always some type of kind of story connected with that, a folklore tale passed down through generational, and it's always kind of hard to find the source. This story is slightly different. It's called the Black Lady of Broomhill, as people call the spirit or the visions that they see, the Black Lady of Broomhill. But it's other known as Sita's story, as Helen's researched and she's done a story with it. So this is a kind of a wide aspect story which covers a potential murder, ghost story, there's visions. Helen's got a personal connection to the story, which you'll find out through the story she'll give, and there's a lot in it. And to be totally fair to John and Helen, they researched this story really well, and there's so much historical data that I found in it as well, and it's been also recounted and investigated by investigators of the day as well, like Ron Halliday. So very, very interesting story, and I'd just like to thank Helen and John for their time on the day, because we did spend about 4 hours discussing all aspects of it and all the historical values of it as well, and I did have to cut it down a bit editing wise for the paranormal aspect of it, but I'd just like to thank them for their time, and Helen for the lunch. so find yourself a quiet space, plug in your earphones and listen in.
Right, well, my name is Helen Moir. I was born in Lochcall in 1950, and my maiden name was Perry. Helen Eleanor Henderson Perry is my full name, and I'm called after the grandmother who eventually became housekeeper at Broomhill House. And she was born in 1857. She went to work in Broomhill in 1869 at the age of 12. Obviously would start probably as a scullery maid, and eventually she actually worked right through to 1939 through marriage and family, and was actually on her way back from her work in her 80s, and took a turn, and miners that were passing found her, and she died 3 days later in her own house. So 70 odd years of my grandmother's life revolved around this estate. She was gone before I was born. I wasn't born in 1950, but my dad related my grandmother's story, and this was a story she'd no reason to fabricate. And her story was that the Black Lady, and now we know what her name is, she was there for maybe just over 2 years or slightly under 2 years at the turn of the 20th century. And my grandmother said she stayed mostly in the house and in the grounds, and she was a servant with fringe benefits. That was her words. But my grandmother, and she was there for, I say, slightly under or over 2 years, And my grandmother was there that night, and it was about 8 o'clock, which would be the time for the gentry to dine.
What time of year was this, when she roughly came? Did you know that?
I don't know exact, I've not got exact dates, but the month of November seems to be the time she disappeared. And funny enough, that became a month that was never ever very good for the Perry family. But my grandmother said she'd seen her, and she had left to come home, and she'd come back. She was staying with her son, her daughter and son-in-law at that time. She wasn't staying in the house. And when she returned to her work the next morning, so we're talking about the back of 5 in the morning, and Captain Henry Montgomery McNeil Hamilton of Ratlook and Broomhill said that she had left the previous evening because she was homesick. This was the story I grew up with. Now, she would have needed to walk, Broomhill House is away that other side of the town, and she would have needed to walk carrying bag and baggage and whatever funding she had, past my window actually, down to the East Station, which is way down behind the cemetery, because the Larkhall Central Station wasn't opened at that time. Now, Chris, a woman of colour at the turn of the 20th century in a place as small as Larkhall would have been noticed. I checked the train times, and the last train for Glasgow would be about 9 o'clock. But when he brought her,
this is the research you done looking past it?
Looking past. So when he brought her to the house, he would just bring her direct, so she really wouldn't get much of her bearings. But what really started me on, I grew up with this story, but at 14, 15, I was too busy looking for, work, going to dance and thinking about the next perfume you were going to wear, or makeup, or anything like that. And I never really put any attention to it, Chris, because it didn't seem that, I never thought much about it. And then when I turned 40, and this is quite significant, I started having these weird dreams, and I could see me in a room, but it wasn't me. It looked like me, but it wasn't me. And I got this long black skirt, and I'm supposed to be my grandmother's double, and a white blouse, and their keys hanging from my waist. And I'm standing in this room as if the man and woman are in the room are not aware of me being there. And I can describe the room. Behind me, there's a bay window with green curtains with gold chintz on it. There's a piano, there's a double door, and there's a double door, beautiful ornate fireplace, and in the fireplace there's a fire screen with a red rose on it. There's a man who I'd never seen in my life before, and a coloured woman on that side. And it looks as if there's something heated going on. And next thing I see is a gold object lying in the male hand, and on his finger he's got a gold ring with a black stone on it. Now I don't see her being hit or anything, and the next thing I see is this white sheet, and it's starting to stain with blood, and I'm following this hand, pulling this white sheet across a black and white marble floor, past a beautiful staircase with 2 polished curling stones, one at each side of it. I go down this passageway into what I think must be a kitchen area.
So are you just standing within the dream or the vision you're seeing? Are you just standing watching this, or are you involved?
I'm standing at the beginning of the dream in the room, listening and watching what's going on. I can't hear what's getting said, but then I'm following it through as if I'm following behind this, this sheet get pulled. Obviously, she must be in it. As I say, I don't see her getting struck. It's just the gold object in the hand, and then I go through into this, which I think must have been a kitchen area, and all I see is a square being lifted, and there's a gold ring on it. The square's lifted, there's 3 stones going down, and that was the end of it. Stops. And then I followed on. I could see myself walking into this nursery, and there was a rocking horse with 1 ear on it, which was strange, and a rocking chair, and just this 1 foot rocking a crib, and this chair sitting beside it, and the foot's rocking the crib, but it was a coloured leg, Chris. And I'm walking towards this crib, but I'm not wanting to look in it. I don't want to see what's in this crib. And when I do eventually look in, all I can see is this kind of, what I would say is a deformed child. So that's what started me off my research, because I thought, I'm either going nuts, or it's somebody in the wee men in the white coats to come and take me away, or is there something that somebody is trying to tell me. So that's what kicked me off in this thing. And then later on, when I found her, she was 40 when he brought her to this country. Exactly the same age I was when I started to have this experience.
When you went back, when you had your vision in that, or dream, or what would you like to call it, a vision or a dream, or would you say probably more a vision? Or?
I would say it's more a vision, because I mean it looked, how can I describe it? See, every time I had it, Chris, it's just, you know how you used to turn the contrast up on the telly and the colours.
Did you have this more than once?
It started repeating.
Oh, did it? Okay.
It started repeating, and then I thought, that's what at first, I mean the first time I thought, rubbish.
So going back to the vision when you, after we went through and the object, see the square thing in the floor, what was that? Was that a panel on the floor that was taken away?
It looked like a slab or a ring or something that would open up to go into the cellarage underneath.
Right,
It's
okay.
just a square. And ironically, Chris, when I was 14, my friend Elizabeth, who's passed away in November, John knew very well, she lost her fight with COVID. That was a kind of hangout for all the youngsters down there at one point. John, didn't we rumbled about down there? And Elizabeth and I were fooling about, and we found it. I can't find it, I've never been able to find it again, because it's so badly overgrown down there. But we actually found this thing and lifted it up. It was exactly as I had. But I hadn't been having my dreams then, I was only 14, their dreams didn't start till I was
because then you have to think back.
But when we lifted it, there was this black cat come out it, and my Elizabeth took off, and she just took off. But it didn't frighten me, I didn't feel... the black lady doesn't make me... I don't believe for a minute she's evil, malevolent or anything. I think she's just been a woman in unfortunate circumstances. And when we lifted that meant that if that cat had come out that way, that meant that cat had to get in another way. That's what I took out of.
So just for the listeners, I mean, it's going back the original kind of story, and what was the woman's name? I know you found her name, so we'll maybe get to that when you done the research and stuff, right? But so when she had left, or when she had allegedly left the place, did your grandmother any feeling at the time?
All my grandmother ever said was that the explanation was she'd left to go home because she was homesick. And my grandmother never accused anyone of anything, and neither have I, because at the end of the day, nobody knows what happened to it, because anybody that does know will be long gone by this time. And my granny wouldn't be party to anything that's sinister, Chris. So lead me back onto that, lost it.
Actually, mainly about what was the kind of feeling at the time.
My grandmother said that the only thing she said was there was no horses out that night and there was no carriage out that night. So she would have needed to walk to take herself home, or was she taken to another estate? They could have done that, but there was no carriage out that night.
So she wasn't implicate anybody or say or accuse anybody, but she would paint a story, paint a picture saying, well, she would have to do X, Y and Z to go that people would have seen her, she's not got a carriage and all these kind of things, so she'd just lay that out there as factual, but no seeing anything.
And you remember, Chris, this was a time when you just need to watch Downtown Abbey or Upstairs and Downstairs. What happened upstairs stayed upstairs. Servants would talk in the servants' quarters, but they wouldn't go out and talk, because this was a very wealthy family that owned a lot. John can verify this, a lot of the pits, a lot of the land. If you didn't eat in those days, you didn't work. There was a certain amount of loyalty to family, imitating how the servants were treated. But I've come up with 5 theories. Did she disappear that night? But my granny says there was no carriage, no horses out. did she get taken to another estate, but then would need her taking her by horse or carriage to another estate? Did she die in childbirth? But then there's no record of a death. There would have been a record of a death if she died in childbirth. She died in natural causes, it would have been the same, you know, or, and this is where it is maybe, and don't know for sure, did she die in other circumstances more sinister at the hands of a person or persons unknown? That can never be proved. And I don't know why these things happened to me. Was it my grandmother that had come back to try and tell me something? Was it just something in my genes? Or I don't know why it happened. There's no explanation for it, Chris.
Well, you've got the connection there, you've got the connection to the area, you've got the connection to your grandmother working there. You're still staying here. How far is it down the road?
She was there for about 1902, maybe to just before.
No, how far is the location for here?
It's what, about
Mile and a half.
Mile and a half.
Right, you're still here.
I'm still here. Yeah.
So you can see the connection there and stuff. So going for that, so that was the kind of main start of the kind of historical story of what happened. So she's either left, but she left or could have left, or she, unlikely, she probably did leave because nobody would have seen her. She would have got a train at time of night or a carriage or whatever else. So, and then obviously by having these visions, it's like something trying to tell you something. So what's the, I know there's obviously maybe where it may come up as well, the stories, sightings offer it as well.
Well, there's been numerous folk have seen her, or had said they've seen her. One chap that was there that was dodging school, he said he was sitting in the ruins with a book.
So now it's the actual stately home.
All that's left now, Chris, is just bits and bobs of stone. It's just
foundations and stuff.
But it's badly overgrown, so they're just bits and pieces of stone. But when I was knocking about down there, and John would be the same, a lot of the house was, the outer walls and some of the inner walls were still standing. Some of the windows, but no glass in them, because there's a reason for why the house went that way. But that chap said he was sitting reading, and he felt this presence behind him, and the pages started turning himself. Another woman that I
did he see anything? Just
this feeling.
Just a feeling, and then that.
I'm trying to go through all the ones I was involved with and the ones I wasn't involved with. The one I was involved with was a girl who was wanting to raise money for the Sick Children's Hospital in Glasgow, and her mother worked for me in the cooperative, and her mother knew my gran, and my gran had showed her a vase that she'd been given at Broomhill House. And this girl said we could do a ghost night, and I says, well, wait a minute, I'm no one publicity in this, because folk think we're crazy. But I says, if it's to raise money for a cause like that, that's a whole different ball game. So there was I think there were about 8 years, and it was a September night, and went down there at 11 o'clock, and we took tea and coffee just to keep ourselves, something to drink during the night if it was cold. And there were 2 or 3 of the boys there, and they made a wee fire, and we were sitting around the fire and just generally chit-chatting, and the flames just went whoosh for no apparent reason. And then Sheena, this is now about 3 o'clock in the morning, and Sheena, who was trying to raise the money, had organised it, she said, I need to go somewhere. And I says, well, it's a long walk home, dear, we'll need to go behind the bush. And at the back down, this is why John's saying about location is so important. At the back of Broomhill House, there's a long path which was always called the Black Lady's Walk. It's still called the Black Lady's Walk. So I says, when we'll go around here, because when I'm down there, Chris, I feel as if I can visualise it, what it was like when it was there. So I took her down this path, and at that point the stable block was still standing, and I had a torch. I says, go in behind there, I says, and I'll just keep a light, I'll not shine it on you, but just to give you enough light to see what you're doing. And I felt this presence behind me, and there was this smell like a musky, remember that rotten hikerati aftershave, some guy, right spicy musky smell, and it was just a shadow that passed that side of me, and I didn't feel threatened, but I just was definitely something there. And Sheena, I said, no tell her, but Sheena said, there's something here, there's somebody standing behind me. I said, no, I'll come out. It's your imagination, come out. And when I shone the light on the stable wall, a shadow just went right across it and disappeared into thin air. Another woman who I interviewed, and this was a woman that was church goer, very staid, spinster, very polite, wouldn't you, the last person on earth you would think it would come out with something like this. And I was interviewing her, and she said that her father had a disagreement with the McNeil Hamiltons over a mirror that she had brought back with her, and they demanded it back. And I said, what do you think happened to it? And this woman... And
the Hamiltons were the family, or to do with the family?
The Mill Hamiltons are the ones that brought her back.
Right, okay.
But this lady I was interviewing, her father had worked to them at one point, and he'd seemingly acquired this mirror that the black lady had brought back. And I says, have you ever wondered what happened to her? She says, she's behind stone and her baby's with her. As simple as that. A woman that you would never in a million years expect to come out with. I actually took a step back. She says, that is the story that I was given. So folk don't just make up these stories. The other one was a Jean McCrae, and I had, at this point, John will tell you, I was having wee bits and bobs out in the paper.
So these could have been potentially stories that were kept quiet at the time and then been passed in through generations.
Well, this woman was her father, and she'd never been married, and her and her father were very close, so this would obviously some of her father's passed on. Or maybe she was around. She could have been old enough to be around, because I'm talking about a lot of years ago.
Yeah.
And Jean McCrae came to me and she said, I have never told anybody this. She says, I've told my husband, but I've never told anybody this. She says, they were about 14, and she says, we were all playing hooky, and we decided to go down and thing went to the ruins. And she says, we went in, I know exactly what she was talking about. She went into through this door and into this room with a bay window, but she says, we've got through the doors, no glass in the windows, and we're sitting talking. And she says, one of the boys thought, to frighten us, and he went out and thrown a firecracker or a squib or something in the door. Now she says, when we went into the house, it was just still ruins, but a lot of the perimeter walls and inside walls were still standing. No furniture, nothing like that there. Now the roof would be off it by that time as well, John, I reckon. So she says, we'd get in, no bother. These doors opened and shut for us, no bother. But she says, when they all took off, and she says, when I was trying to follow them, two doors that I had come through wouldn't open. And she says, what I did, I just jumped out the window with no glass. She says, I ran round, she said, I lost my bearings, and she's run round the front, round the back to the what they call the Black Lady's Walk. And she said she was standing, and then she felt this presence behind her and this strong smell. And she said, I turned round, and she said, I saw it as plain as anything. And she says she was standing like that, but her feet were slightly hovering a bit above the ground.
So just for the listeners, their arms are kind of crossed over her chest.
As if you would be in death, probably.
Yeah.
And she says, one hand came away and she pointed to the ground. I says, what did you do? She says, well, first I wet myself, then I took off, and then I thought, can I go home? My mum I'll get into a row for being down there for no being in the right place to start with. So she says, I went to my granny, and my granny said, she looks as if, my granny knew there was something straight away, and she told her what had happened. She says, we need to go back and see if it happens again. And she says, a year later, she says, I forced myself to go back down, and the exact same thing happened. Now this was a woman that, she says, I've never told them this, and she came to me. I didn't go out and ask these folk to tell me their stories, Chris. And then, what was the other one? That was Jane McCrae. And then, Jean Gibb, her mother, see, after he died in 1924, he Lloyd, a son and 3 daughters. They never took over the estate, they just came an odd night or they never actually took over the estate. And they kept caretakers. And Jean gives, mother and father were caretakers, and she says we were staying in the servants' bit and at the kitchen area. I said, well, is there any part of the house you like to go through, Jean? And she says, oh, I used to love to sneak through into the dining room. I says, how did you get there? So I used to go down the wee passage at the side, across the black and white marble floor hallway, past the grand staircase and into the drawing room. And she described the drawing room exactly as I had seen it. And I'd never met this woman in my life before.
That's mad.
So it's, I mean, this is only a tip of the iceberg, John, isn't it?
It certainly is.
It's only a tip of the iceberg. Do you want to do some of the
I touched a few questions first before we go on. Did you, the name of the kind of path, did you find out why it was called? I know obviously people have had sightings, like something like go sighting in there, but did you dig into why it was called that?
It was just always called that, and it's obviously been handed down from servants that worked there at the time. Probably that's maybe just where she walked, exercised.
There's probably a lot more accounts out there as well, and that's the thing as well. Once you get it out there, and more people, you know yourself, people don't want to come forward with accounts because people think they're crazy and stuff, and that. But like the more people who talk about stuff, it makes it more normalised and knows.
I mean, I don't feel the least bit threatened with her. I think she's just been a woman of circumstances in a man's world that's just been shifted for pillar to post and didn't really have any real control of their own life. I mean, you're and the McNeill Hamiltons were a very wealthy family. They were landed gentry, and I mean, it was what he was doing. Chris, wasn't it uncommon for most of his contemporaries were doing the same thing. I mean, for the thrown down, there's mistresses have been accepted. In fact, some of the Victorian women went out and picked their husbands' mistresses because it meant if they had a mistress, they would have less chance of having more kids. I mean, it was acceptable for in that time for.
What is the most latest sighting that you found today? Was it?
Well, there was a few years back. There was a girl. Now Lynn Hamilton would be able to fill some of this stuff in. There was a girl who fell and hurt herself, and she felt there was this woman had sat beside her and tried to comfort her. I think that was just a few. That's in the same area.
Yeah.
There's been quite recent ones, John, hasn't there? As I say, I've not really touched a lot of this for a few years, Chris. But there's so much material. It would take you hours and hours and hours to get through it. But that is what really started me off, man.
No, I can understand. It's totally really interesting. Obviously with the historical bit, and obviously getting into people seeing the sightings, and then you get to finding a picture that she'd probably know anywhere.
I don't think. Well, as I say, you can't accuse them because you don't know.
No,
you just don't know. She's always been. She's been an urban myth for a long time. But now I feel she's no an urban myth anymore. The woman had a life. She had a name. She had. So she's now an urban myth. She's an urban legend, literally, because she did love.
As we were talking about earlier on, you were talking about there's quite a lot of places. Every place has got a green lady, a grey lady, all these type of things, and they're looking at that now. A lot of research you have done and looking at it and finding out about it, you can understand where this is originated from, at least anyway.
What I can do, Chris, is well, John, do you want to tell Chris about the mine, which is important? There's cellarage underneath Broomhill House, because this is where John can fill in a lot of the. Broomhill House was built on the site of the castle of Old Marken, am I right, John? In 1440, right?
1443 to be absolutely pedantic.
And it was a tower house to start with, wasn't it?
Yes, I've got the details.
You want to do this bit then, John, because you know. Okay,
right, well, first of all, let's look at the background to this. I've worked with Ordnance Survey maps for most of my adult life in the town planning department and elsewhere. I used to be put in charge of the geology maps of the area, which is very important to what's happened so far. Dechman Hill, sometimes known as Cathkin Braes, near Glasgow, was many years ago a volcano. Fault lines, geological fault lines, come out from Cathkin Braes towards Lark Hall and split into various channels, if you like. It was almost like a herringbone fashion. And what it has done, it has created, say, a mine working soft coal 30 feet to the side. They're working on hard coal, because once upon a time they were level. Sometimes we ended up with a difference of 600 feet thanks to geological movement. In the Avon Gorge itself, near to the house of Broomhill, we have the Big Lynn, which is a fault line. We have the Wee Lynn, which is a fault line. They have a sulphuric well called Kitchenmuir Well, which is a fault line at Ringsdale Castle. There's a fault line at Millhew Bridge as well. So a lot of fault lines, and a lot of these fault lines have coal, iron, sandstone, ganister, which is a very, very hard sandstone used to make fireplaces in the old days, and the softer sandstone that they used for chimney heads. So there's a lot of activity here, and limestone workings.
That containing like quartz as well and stuff.
There wouldn't be any quartz here. Your nearest quartz would basically be found up at Lead Hills and Warnock Head. We have the soft sedimentary rocks here, but what you would most definitely have is an awful lot of iron. Iron would produce the sulphur. When you go down the Avon Gorge, not far from here, you find little trickles of water coming out of the ground, and it's bright orange in colour, and it's basically iron, and the stink of rotten eggs is very, very real. Behind Broomhill House itself there is a kitchen burn. It's a tiny wee trickle of a burn, but a very deep valley. At the last ice age there would have been a tremendous amount of water to cut these gills, as we call them, as an ash gill head, guardian gill. You would end up with a very deep ravine and a tiny wee trickle. But immediately behind Broomhill House is an old iron mine, worked from 1851 to 1858 by a Mr. Craig for Mr. Dunlop, who ran the ironworks at Quarter. There were 5 major retorts, if you like, producing iron on behalf of Dixon's Blazes in Glasgow, and they tried the iron behind Broomhill House. Sorry, Mr. Craig, it's not up to the quality that we're used to. We've been getting stuff from Coatbridge, and we've been getting it from Hamilton for years. It's good stuff. The stuff that you're producing is rubbish, mister. Just leave it. So in 1858 he abandoned that mine, but like a lot of other mines in the area, even the ones that went straight down, they didn't fill them up. They would just cover it over with everything from logs to what I love calling deep dugs, just to cover the area, which makes Lark Hall extremely dangerous, and a lot of other places as well. But
so it's cutting mines and holes everywhere then?
Absolutely, it's honeycombed. But this particular mine immediately behind the house if you just were able to move some of the stonework away, you could walk straight in.
Mhm.
And the other interesting thing is that the geology of the area has so many what we call pirate workings.
Mhm.
Coal miners worked during the strikes, the general strike. There was a strike of the 1890s where they went down the braes and they worked their own coal seams, and there's no trace of these particular tunnels, if you like.
Mhm.
And I've been in them. I am what you would call an urban explorer, and I have been since I was about 14.
Mhm.
And it's only in the last 4 or 5 years that I've actually stopped doing it, because my big pal, who was a coal miner, is now in a care home, Big Tam.
You think people think being an urban explorer is a new thing?
It's not.
It's not.
It's not. In United States, they're called creepers.
Mhm.
In this country, they're called urban explorers, and it's everything from old mines up at Wanlock Head and Loud Hills, and I've been doing quite a number,
Mhm.
and also abandoned, ruined houses, castles,
Mhm.
and foundations underneath hotels and all sorts of things.
Mhm.
I've been in them.
See, there's been there was a wee bit of contention with the family that actually bought the ground, they just owned the bit of the ground of the ruins, and they said there was no cellarage underneath Broomhill. Now there definitely is, because as John was saying there, but through the stages, it kicked off in the 20 odds, and then during the Covenanting period it was, wasn't it? There was the shift in this area was predominantly Covenanters, and at one point there was a mob had been up to burn. There was a private chapel belonging to the Ratliff Hamiltons, just at the Castle
Yes.
Rosemarken.
On Castle Rome.
On the Castle Rome. Aye.
Chapel Rome.
Chapel.
I beg your pardon.
And that she had come out and said, well, if you didn't burn it down, I'll make a good barony, and actually stood to 1714. But also, so you had the castle, we're going into the 14, now built in 1420 odds, and then we move on. In the 15th century, 16th century, they were very involved, the Hamiltons in this area, and the Ratliff Hamiltons, with Mary Queen of Scots. And if Mary Queen of Scots had slept in every bed she's supposed to have slept in Scotland, it'd be true. But anyway, the Ratliff Hamiltons, Broomhill Hamiltons, they supported Mary, and because they had supported Mary, William Drury, who was the governor of Berwick, came up to the Castle Rosemarken, and it was raised fire. So it's built, it's burned. Then in the Covenanting period, they're going to have a go at the private chapel, doesn't harm. Then in 1943, the army was used. All the furniture had been taken out of it, and the army were using it, built it in Newfoundland. There's no soldiers there, and they reckon that the army would just put some furniture in. All the McNeill Hamiltons had taken all the furniture out and moved them up to East End to his wife's estate. And they reckon it was a chap maybe smoking that's caused the fire. So the house was badly damaged in 1943. It lay and went into a ruinous estate. And then in the 1950s, a family called Hamilton, who they're no related, bought the ground, and they've owned that. They've sold a bit of the ground off since that. But the initial house, the ground, the ruins, they still own that, but there's nothing ever been done to it. Part of the reason I would expect would be true that you wouldn't be able to get services down to where that house stood. I'll let you see the house actually.
Next to Broomhill House there are two tunnels, there were two tunnels that you could walk into. One was the brine cellar or ice house, where you could go in and it would be somewhere to keep the bits of feed, sheep and pigs and things. But further along towards the new Asda, there is another tunnel bricked up, and the interesting thing about this bricked up bit, there is a brass tap, and I'm wondering, right, what seems to have happened is that this Patrick Home tank has been filled up with water, and this is where they got their water supply, because it comes from natural springs coming down from Strother Hill, and it goes into this. How drinkable the water is, I don't know.
He married Chris in 1896. Edith Gertrude Thompson Carmichael of Carmichael. Now this family has a history going back to Kenneth McAlpin. They've got a better pedigree than the McNeill Hamiltons had. And when he got married in 1896, I've got documents here. This was the wedding. It was like Di and Charles get married. All the who's who, all the gentry the day were there. There were bonfires in Tinto Hill. There was dinners here, there, and everywhere. And when he died in 1924, that's what he gets in the paper. Always obituary. This is why we're saying location's a good thing as well. He's buried in Larkhall Cemetery, but there's no marker. There's a 4-layer family plot because John's measured it out, and there's only one stone, and that stone has got his father on it, and his father was William Henry McNeill Hamilton, and his father was a decorated, a very highly decorated soldier who had served during the Crimean War, had been at Balaclava, Sebastopol, was part of the charge of the Light Brigade, and he married a Polish girl who was of Polish nobility, Polish royalty, connected to Queen Victoria, but then everybody in Europe was connected to Queen Victoria at one point. But they came to Scotland, and she died in Glasgow, Ladislav. So I've got documents that can prove.
Sobieski.
Sobieski was Prince Charles, one of Prince Charles' mother. Now I think it was she was Sobieski, but she died. Then William married a woman called Mariana Ewing, whose nickname was Daisy. She was 20 years younger than him. She's the mother of the chap that brought the Black Lady to Broomhill. She was 20 years younger, and she was born in Mobile in Alabama, but of Scottish ancestry. And she came to Scotland, and that's how she met Henry's father.
So the one, did they have much on the gravestone? Was the man who brought the Black Lady or not?
No, he's the father of the son who brought the woman back. When he died in 1924, my mother was at that school, and she would be 9, and she remembers standing bare feet, miner's daughter, and at 1920, but that would be between the strikes, and she says we were all taken out in the playground to see the Laird's funeral going past, and she says we were all excited, expecting to see all the pomp and the fancy frocks and all the thing. One car and the hearse, that was it. There's no marker. What John and I think, there's been other headstones down there, probably with the names on them, and for some reason they've been removed. So what I think has happened, he's been ostracised by the gentry, and that's what they did. They wouldn't come out and talk about anything, but they would just give him a white, a white birth. But he married Edith Gertrude Thompson. They had one son and 3 daughters, but the marriage was not successful. He was a bit of a rascal, as was his brother, and they really separated in 1910, but she came and went and stayed there as a kind of frontage just to make it look respectable, because he was dallying about with different things, and his brother Claude was gay. Well, that means nothing in today's world. Doesn't bother me anyway. But he was gay. But imagine someday gay.
Like back then,
1900. But he was gay. But he had a violent temper with it, as did Henry. And according to Henry's wife, Henry, who's responsible for the Black Lady, she said that her life was made a misery by both her husband and her brother-in-law. And she took her family back to East End. She's actually buried up in the East End estate, because when I tried to interview Richard Carmichael and I mentioned the McNeill Hamiltons, he didn't want to know, because there obviously been bad blood, between the families. So that's giving you another wee bit of the, and that's
just interesting sort of history here as well in the area. But what can you think? So obviously, you're saying going back, obviously the castle was there first, and then you end up at the Broomhill house at the end.
I'll show you, I've got photographs.
And then with that as well, with all that history there as well, apart from obviously the sightings of the Black Lady and things like that, is there anything else we can see? Because you've got, like, the thing as well, what we touched on earlier on, we were talking before obviously we're recording, was obviously activity in that always seen around fault lines and things like that, and you've got like the fault line coming right through, you can see earlier on, it comes through that area, the fault line. Right. It kind of runs through where the house was and all that kind of stuff. And
well, there could have been other sightings, it's never...
No, you do the Black Lady, I'm talking about other sightings here, like in the area.
I don't know of any, Chris, there could be, but this is what's quite strange about this. She's that in this story. She's a very small cog in which is a huge story, really. But I've never really heard there could be some, maybe way back in time there's been, but it's never actually been recorded, maybe somebody's saying something. But for some reason she seems to have, her being there or her presence or her whatever seems to have been the story that's lasted the longest. I mean, you're talking about a family that were related. That's how the Hamiltons claim the right to be the Premier Dukes, because they were married into the Stuarts. When the Queen comes to Holyrood and it comes to the Scottish Parliament, it's the Duke of Hamilton that carries the thing out, and they're still counted the Premier Dukes. And these Broome Ratliff Hamiltons, the Duke of Hamilton and Châtellerault and Elzern, they've all descended from kind of more or less one parent family. So I'm not, this man to me is, I can't see I don't know, I can't see what happened to the Black Lady or Sita Pardine, what's her right name, but generally he really wasn't doing anything different from what his contemporaries were doing, and the Victorians were very much into the occult. Alistair Crowley was welcome in so many different houses. I mean, they were dabbling in all sorts of stuff. They did, even up to a few years ago, they found remnants, some was still going on at Cadsey Castle. Didn't they, John? Remember they've talked about, there was something still naughty, somebody playing about down there.
When I stopped working briefly at the planning department, I worked for a very short time at Marley Buildings at Carluke, and then I got a job with the Parks department, and most of the work was the renovation of Châtellerault Country Park, the Duke of Hamilton's hunting lodge.
I've not been there before, Châtellerault.
I took my wife, or the girlfriend who became my wife, down into the cellars, and we saw, and Fiona being brethren, she wanted out of there as fast as possible. There was is that a pentacle?
Pentagram or pentagram.
And various other emblems painted on the walls. And
This is when the Charleville was up and running.
this is before it was up and running. This is when it was a ruin, and before they
So it
made
was
the
getting
areas.
reinstated.
Yes, before it had been reinstated and made into kitchens, bathrooms, and goodness knows what else in this particular part. And
Pentagram.
right, so this you're talking 1979, 1980 when I saw this. When I was working there for 10 years, and that has been going on, although I personally didn't see any, but there was a girl in the parks department who I still know very well. I don't want to say her name on record, but she headed it. This particular coven, basically they're from a posh bit of Hamilton, and this was their favourite hunting ground or meeting place. Where they went after that, I've no idea, but that was the first real sign of that sort of occult that I had seen. And my wife said, "Don't you ever bring me back to anything like this again."
What was the place that Helen was talking about as well? Was that the same place or was that different?
It's the same place. It's a pity she's away making her cup of tea, because I would like to have brought her into that.
She said there was some recently. She said there was some recently. Was that no? Is it Colleen? Is it no? She's not at Colleen Castle now. Was it that?
There's Castle, which is right next door. It's from here to that sandstone building immediately behind you, less than 100 yards away. Castle and Ringsdale Castle on the west side of the River Avon is called the Dorling Ride, DAW Dorling. Yes, Dorling Ride. And it was from Castle to Ringsdale Castle. It was the hunting ground for King David II. So there's that going on. But yes, people have been meeting at Castle. That is why there's now a very high fence around the whole thing, except on the Avon Gorge side, where it's a sheer drop of 130 feet.
What did they find at the Castle?
I think they reckoned it was some kind of coven. They were still doing some kind of stuff.
Right, so they've moved from what I'm telling you, because I saw that with Fiona in the cellars at Charleroi Country Park. So that is where they went. That's where they went after that.
Yeah, there was.
So they'll have moved again. They'll find some place to other coven.
I'll in here, Chris. I'll show you some. I've got a photograph. I can show you a photograph of him, and then I can give you more information and stuff. I mean, as I told you, that's.
As you see, in terms of, I know there's a lot of history there and all that kind of stuff as well.
Are you still recording?
It's fine, just let it run, it's like I can edit all the stuff. It's really obviously how it ties in with the kind of paranormal stuff and all that kind of stuff, and links in as well. Like main kind of stuff I'm interested in as well, in that regard.
Well, any psychics that's been down there, Chris, they've always said it's male presence there's a bad male presence down there. Nobody's ever come up to say that it's she, and I don't.
So ley lines and rods and whatnot won't pick up water. There's a hell of a lot of water under that hole moving. We need to take that into consideration before we, whatever it is that we're looking for in divining rods, we have to take that into consideration.
To the water.
And take that in consideration, and of course a whole lot of services as well. Pipes and whatnot.
Well, when Ron Halliday was down at Broomhill, I'm going back again into my 40s, I'd be about 42, 43 I think at this point. And Ron was doing his stuff. I'd never seen anything like this before. I knew about it, but I'd never actually seen it, but none. And but then we were quite near the back of the house, and as John says, you've got the oven on one side, and you've got the kitchen burning on the other side. And two of the rods went flying up through the air, landed up a tree, and they hung there for years and years. In fact, a few times I went down there, they were still there.
But they actually came out his hand.
Came out his hands, and Ron would confirm that to you, Chris. Yeah. Went out his hands and just poof. You know,
that's weird. I've only seen that once on television, and that was a television documentary the Germans had used in the 1970s for a new factory, but they had to have a source of water, and they used divining rods. And it was a slap bang in the middle of the Saxony plain, and that's exactly what happened.
It flew out his hand.
Flew out his hand, and they said there's water there, and there was.
Oh, interesting.
In about 1964. When were you in Germany?
I was in Germany in 69. I was in Germany.
Well, it would be around about 1968, 1969. This documentary, which I've still got in the house, which proves that does work. There's a lot I don't believe in, but I can be not easily changed, but I can be persuaded if I saw proof of it.
I always say I'm a sceptical believer.
You have to be.
Sceptical believer. I mean, so you have an open mind. Interesting enough, just I'll ask you off the cuff, because like I know you've done a lot of urban exploring and stuff. Any strange encounter in urban exploring? Because if you're doing caves,
I haven't had experiences like that. I've had other experiences. For example, I had a conversation. It was near Crossford Bridge, about 2016. I was taking a walk along a well-worn path. I can't remember the person's name, so I'll have to sort of paraphrase. A fella came up to me in his late 70s and had a conversation with me. And it was something along the lines of, my wife and I used to come down here on the path where the bridge was to my right, the River Clyde was right in front of me, and the pathway obviously is the banks of the Clyde. This fellow stopped and started to talk to me. Looking at his eyes, it was like looking at glass. I felt very, 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 very strange and just not very happy. So, John, you're on your own. I don't know what the hell's going to happen next. And I looked past the guy and I was about to say to him, "You've dropped your tartan scarf." And I turned around. I thought, the path went up maybe 4 or 5 feet behind me and then across the bridge. I says, bloody hell, where did he go?
Disappear?
Yes. So I went up there and I looked round, nothing. I went back to the tartan scarf, and it wasn't a tartan scarf at all. It was 3 different colours of heather. Purple, red and white. And in the middle was a plaque. The guy had given me his name, just say it was John Brown. I do not remember, but it said John Brown 1900 to 1978 or something like that. And I said, no, I don't believe this. I walked along just a wee bit, doubled back, got to my car and went home. That was the end of my 8-mile hike that day. And I've only mentioned this to 3 or 4 people. I daren't mention it to the Reverend Elizabeth Cleland up in Braehead House, who I sometimes go to. I would be looked at and, oh dear, I don't know, had my head chopped off. But I've had that experience. But I've had experiences, only 2 or 3 in my life, not during the night, Not up at Broomhill, because when you go up to Broomhill, what are you looking for? You're looking for a ghost. You're looking for a spirit. Ghosts, if they exist at all, are going to appear. You could be one. Because it's as clear and as ordinary and as solid as you are. Up to 2 or 3 times that I've had experiences of that, and that is one that really does stick in the mind with me. Anything else has been the sound only. But I have been told that I have, from the age of 3 or 4, always had migraines. And I have a book on migraines that can tell you can hear. The most common one for me is the front doorbell ringing. They took the batteries out years ago. And I was woken up with this loud doorbell. No ghost or nothing. My wife had died a number of years ago, and that's another interesting story. So first of all, this audible thing could be, and it's 95% certain to be, migrainous. But my wife, one day, middle of the night, up for ordinary, obvious reasons, back into bed, and Fiona, my wife, said, "Love you." Love you too, Nonna. And a lovely smell of perfume. That was in October 1997. She had died in August 1996.
There's
not nights. I spoke to a doctor over here, Dr. Duncan, and he said to me, "You won't hear that again. If you do, come back in a hurry. But I do not think you'll hear that again." I said, "Do you believe," and he's dead now, by the way, I can tell you this, "do you believe in a hereafter, another world?" Of course. Ask the majority of the people in the NHS. They won't tell you straight in the middle of a theatre, but some people know what you're doing is very real. I'm convinced of that.
Oh, when my father died, I had sat. He was in the pits for 51 years. This is my father, who was the son of the woman that worked in Broomhill.
Yes.
The last 2 years of his life was horrendous, because he actually had pneumocinosis, but the doctor put it down to chronic bronchitis. Did my mother out a pension and everything, but anyway, that's another story. And I had sat with him in the bottom room till about 11:30, and I says, "I'll go up the road, Mum, I'll have a couple of hours and I'll come back down, because I'll need to go up and see." Andrew was, that day was 78, Andrew was only 8 and Kirsty was only 3, they were young children at the time. And I went up the road and I thought, "I'm not going to bed, I'll just lie on the couch." And about 10 to 5, I could see, I don't know if it was a vision or a dream, but I could see this woman again, this older woman with a black skirt and a white thing, and she puts her hand down and my dad takes her, and that was at 5 to 5. 10 minutes later, my door goes and it was my Uncle Davy, "I need to come, your father's away." And when I went down, I said to my mother, "What time did my dad go?" She said, "At 5 to 5, I looked at the clock." No, there's no, and my dad couldn't speak properly for 2 years because he had Parkinson's, and the night he died, his voice came back as clear as a bell, and his last words were to me, "You've been the best, I could always depend on you," because I was one to help nurse my dad so much. And then he never spoke again, he just went in there, thing. But it was exactly that, and I can still see that hand coming down, and him, my dad reaching out and taking it.
No, I definitely believe that there is something. I mean, for me, like, I never experienced in that regard. One thing that my mum died when I was 21, and it was probably a year after.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
No, sorry, it was a year after, and then I was basically just looking to go to bed one night, and I came out. She was doing the Penzance at this time. She was staying. In fact, she actually stayed in the Silly, and I was doing the kind of staying. And then she died and was down there. I came back up the road and was in Scotland, and it was a year after, and I was just about to go to bed, and I heard a voice, clear as day, clear as a bell, saying Christopher, and it was like her accent, like clear as day, and I kind of just bolt upright and I was looking, but and that was it. But I don't know, it was just kind of like a sign she was there or whatever.
But it would be said in such a way that it would only come from her and nobody else. Because that's what my wife would say, and I would call her Nona, which was her pet name. And she's a pet name for me, which is Uncle John, for the simple reason that I looked after the backside more often than she did.
One for that as well, where that was that, I was just like her saying Christopher, but it was kind of like an urgency way she said it, but it was the way it was definitely her voice, and it was like I could hear it clear as a bell. I don't even think I've told my sisters or something at the time, but
Same like Sita. This woman was 40 when she came to Scotland, Chris. So this woman, somewhere in Sri Lanka or Ceylon, no Ceylon.
So you read, just for the audience, because we've kind of spoken about that through, but you've researched who she was, where she came from.
She was Sita Pardine. She was born in Crown Colony in Ceylon in 1862, which made her 10 years older than him. For some reason she went to South Africa, and she became probably the British Army used a lot of these women for nurses. Some actually were sent to work in the mines, but she would be used as, they called them camp servants actually, but they were really doing nursing things. Because the British Army had a lot of, they used to have a camp followers, their wives would sometimes be taken to some of these places. And because Gandhi was in South Africa, so when I was told that Sita is only, is a Hindu Buddhist sect, and the Sita means high caste. A girl gets named Sita, so that means this woman has had some form of education. She wouldn't be, should be. I see her as quite an educated lady, and somewhere in Sri Lanka, which was Ceylon, there might be some photograph in an old frame that's yellowed with age. It could be a great auntie, a great because I said, well, if this woman was high caste, how on earth did she find herself getting sent to South Africa? And the explanation was that if she had offended a husband or offended a father, daughters were only counted as no like chattel, but in what they could bring. Well, it was pretty much, with aristocracy here. I mean, back to him again. That man must hate me.
So is that the only picture you got of him?
I've got a better one as we go further on. That's back to Percy. Now Gary, I don't know why he's done this. Now there's your black and white marble floor. There's your staircase. That's what Broomhill would actually look like.
Well, I've got...
That's the kind of image I can see,
You've got a double pillars at the top.
Double pillars at the top. I don't know whether it's true or not, but there was a story that he'd actually went a bit look one day and tried to bring the bloody horse into the house, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. And see, when you think of this, Chris, Britain has had all these countries all over the world, part of the empire, part of the Raj, so it would be quite easy enough for a woman to be brought in the start of the 20th century and somebody to be brought back in the start of this century. I mean, it wasn't uncommon.
And Goslington, by the way, is down at Sanford. It's got nothing to do with us here at all.
No.
It's between Sanford and
that's just maps again.
Right, that's the same map as I showed you. Can you go back to that one just for a second? Right, Broomhill House is here. That's the iron mine. That's a deep gully. It's called the Kitchen Burn, and it's flowing that way.
To be the Broomhill House, just in the middle, that's a square there, the wee small square.
Right, that wee thing, it looks like a hut, means it's either a mine that goes straight in, called an ingonine, which comes from the French Inglis, and it's also assigned for a day level. A day level would be a drainage channel, but it's not a drainage channel, it's straight into this here, which is ironstone. That there and that there are 2 pit shafts, not your normal winding gear, but it would be wound like going down a well.
Right.
Which proves, and I've proved it elsewhere, that these are pre-1847, because after the year 1847 they started using proper winding gear, and not only that, these would not be in the middle of housing, which proves to me that is about at least 150 to 200 years old, that one. And the houses just would not have existed at the time.
So am I right in saying Broomhill House, the cellarage would practically run parallel to that pit?
Your cellarage, no, first of all, these are your outhouses, is there, so your kitchen is there. Your kitchen is there.
The cellars when they connected, haven't they?
But there's no connection.
No connection.
No.
He's taken, if you like, he's taken out perhaps a body, and that would still, he would be able to move some of the stone and the rubble and deep dugs, as I like to call them, and store the body in there and then cover it up again. No reason for it, because it's still there.
One of the mediums that was down there,
That's the home farm, isn't it?
she said she saw 13 folk down there, and one was a child.
13 people down that hole.
In that area.
In that area.
And one was a child. But there was a
You mean death though?
Aye, but I don't know whether that. I mean, I just take what they say.
Aye,
I don't. But I know for a fact there was a wee boy that worked on the estate, and he was drowned tragically in the Avon. And the reason he drowned, he went into the water with his wellings on, and the wellings
Oh dear.
filled him. One of the mediums, this wee boy seems to, his name was McNeil, but the McNeil part of the McNeil Hamilton name comes from the McNeils of Barra, Tenish or Parkish or something like that. That's where the McNeil comes in. But this wee boy seemingly worked in the estate, and as you go into Morgan Glen and make to go up towards the house, 2 or 3 mediums have actually said they've seen a wee boy standing at the tree down there. So whether, again, I've just to take what they say and...
I'm just thinking though, like I wonder if the 2 brothers had done anything else. I mean, in that regard,
Say that again,
had done anything else. I mean, because they didn't seem like nice people in that regard.
Well,
I'm sure they've done a hell of a lot.
So
this is this back to this grave again. Well, I know Claude, according to what I've been reading in there, he liked his wild parties, and when they get into a temper, they get into a temper. So, because she's accused him, the brother, and now it doesn't say much for Henry if he allowed his brother to treat his wife like that.
Well, that's it, and then you don't know, like if they've got like some mass pit they can just put people into.
Well, that's another point.
You know.
These are just all. Now where's Broomhill here?
Right, give us
There's there.
There's Broomhill there.
I see there, it's there.
Broomhill, Ratlock.
And how old is this map? This is the 15th century?
Aye.
Yeah.
And you can see distinctly see that that's
No,
a Welland.
Mm-hmm.
But see how the spelling is?
Mm-hmm.
Right, there's Broomhill again.
That's inside the brine cellar at Broomhill. It's now been closed off. Now, where that was, the stable block was here, and the circular courtyard in front of it. And if you walked across the field a wee bit, there's
Is that the roof or is that the floor?
that's
the top of the dome.
Right. Okay.
So you would crawl on your belly and you're looking up. So whoever's taken that has gone like that
Oh, right. Okay.
to there. And that there is there. And it goes like yawn.
I've been in that, Chris, and you crawled in. It's a wee bit away from the house, but you've got the stable block here, and then the brine cellar. You go down over the dip, and you went into it. You crawled in, and then it went down. It went down that, I would say, just about the height of that. That's my granddaughter's, by the way. I'm not that big.
I went down further than that. I went down about 12 feet.
So that, but see at the bottom of it, there was a door. Because they wouldn't have just stuffed for the top. There must have been a connection for the house to get to it.
Up in Strathclyde Park, and sorry for interrupting, but there is the one that they have actually cleared it out, and it's now part of Strathclyde Park. You can actually see one in operation. It does have a grill at the bottom where we would put in the dead pigs and salted. And they would have put in some snow as well. The snow would melt eventually, but no wonder there's a lot of stomach upsets, for heaven's sake.
Now here he is. I'll zoom in. Zoom out again, I went too far on that. That's Henry. That's Claude. That's local businessman, obviously. But you can see there's strong resemblance between the three brothers. And I wouldn't have liked to meet any of them in a dark night, I don't think. He in particular seemed to be the worst temper-wise out of all of them. And he died at Broomhill House, and his partner was found dead at Broomhill House as well. So whether his partner is down in the cemetery beside him, but he's buried down there, and John and I could take it. And neither him or him, and just the father that was the hero of the Crimean War.
Here's an interesting thing, Chris, because I don't take photographs nowadays because it was an old-fashioned camera. I used to get that on the camera. Can you tell the difference between what is a mistaken film and what is an orb?
Well, I'd always put a lot of them are down to that one there is quite malevolent, I mean, but like a lot of them are down to dust and water particles. So you get like dust that goes in front of the flash. So it takes a picture, enhances it and pumps it up. I mean, the same with the water particles. You get it either moisture, you get it in moisture or dust. But that there, that's actually great. It's like it's one of the better ones I've seen compared to some people put online.
Well, strangely enough, you're saying that, Chris, because this bit here takes you up over what was the library and then the kitchen area. I could take, and one of the times I was down there, the medium says to me, "Come closer to me, because there are male presence standing behind you," and a very unhappy man. And it was exactly in that area where that
there, like that's.
How do we know that's not a tree in person?
That's the see the break. Know how we climbed over those stones, John?
Yes.
That's that bit of the house. I know.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah.
You know how we climbed over the stones to get to the.
You zoom into that,
right? So
that's probably one of the better rock pictures I've ever seen. Like when you. Is it zoomed in already? Is it?
Yeah, there's the zoom.
So what exactly is an orb?
So to be honest, like the people, in terms of the ones in photographs, quite a lot of the ones get put in photographs, and loads of people put them online with the time. I always think majority of them, I'd say 99% are dust particles or water vapour. But people, regardless of things that are photographed and the flash breaking off of something, I mean, or the light breaking off of that, or like camera flare or stuff like that, people see them. People actually see them. So it's actually like they maybe see like a ball of light floating about. Or there's one of the researchers down in North Yorkshire, they see like large things in the sky, right? So they see, you could almost say it's like a UFO, but it's like it's just a large light. It's like sometimes you get a large orange light. It's as bright as the sun, and it'll disappear, right? Yes. Sometimes they can't see it, right? They can't see it, but they can get it on night vision cameras. They can actually, you can get it from infrared, you can see it in infrared. You can't see it in the normal frequency of light you look through, but other times you can't see them. So people can maybe see them and they'll say, "Oh, look at that," and it disappears, and they can't see it. But they'll go and put like these things. You've seen these things coming in and out of the sea, anything that they see, and then they'll put like a night vision camera on it, and they'll be able to still see it, although the naked eye can't see it. Or they can see it through just like a long walking day.
That was on the television fairly recently, and I like these kind of programmes. And what they thought it was, would you believe it, a form of lightning?
Ball lightning. So there's different explanations. Like there's the explanations where it's a form of ball lightning. So you get that. The other explanation is the piezoelectric effect caused by quartz and granite and stuff like that. So with the pressures of that, doing into geology and stuff, that it can cause, with electric charges, it can basically cause.
Right. So see, this is what we're saying. If we get that out of the way, as Conan Doyle would say, what is left must be the truth.
Aye, like the Occam's razor type.
So we have to look at these things before we take.
That's the thing though, because like for quite a lot of them, the pictures you get up.
Oh, I hate that one. Oh God, I hate that one.
You get camera flare and stuff.
Look at this.
That's Percy.
What's the person?
Would you look at his bloody fingers? Dear God Almighty, that's horrible.
That's what it seemed like to me, him in the dark. Look. That actually gives me a bit of the creeps, actually.
Oh, it's a horrible one. Get rid of it.
Now this is where TV Tam 3 years ago. This is the plonker that was supposed to get hit with a lance.
He was interviewed. Remember you did that programme for the STV? Well, he was interviewed, he and his pal, in a tent. They're the ones who saw the Grey Man of Ben McDouie.
Right.
There's been sightings of that right through the years.
Well, they have.
The 1800s right through.
I've got a guy who I can't remember it. Hamish, what's his name? He invented a cradle to take injured people off the mountains. Is a very famous mountain, Scottish mountaineer.
Oh aye.
Oh hell! And he, in his book, Hamish McInnes, and he talks about the Grey Man of Ben McDouie.
There's another guy who wrote a book up here. He's called Arthur Gray. He's dead now. But he
was in Scottish Mountaineering Club.
That's it. He was up basically. He was the same. Arthur Gray was in it as well, and the fact that he worked on the lands, like he worked in forestry and stuff, and he collected loads of accounts in the area off mountaineers. But the thing is, I had never really got into the book because I kind of seen the name of the book. It was the Big Grey Man of Ben McDouie. It just looked tongue in cheek and quite funny. No funny, but it just didn't really seem like a But the reason they called it that is because the Gaelic name for it was pronounced, but when translated it was called the Big Grey Man. Right, so that's why it was called that. And I never really looked into it much before, but when you look at all the stories that he's collected through the years, and then how it interlinks with, because now there's that much data that people have seen these things, not just here but in other countries and stuff, you can tie it in with other stuff. And especially as well with other things where it's always on quartz and granite and all that, but he only put accounts in the book that he thought were really gone in the book and he could probably substantiate, because they were all like mountaineers that he knew and he respected, or quite a lot of the cases like it's high class kind of mountaineers, they're actually in the papers and stuff, in the Scotsman and all that, some of the accounts that the guys had put on, and some of them were mad.
Well, this is when folk, as I say, I took a note of everything, folk, all these ones, and I say folk came to me and I thought, well, they all can't, maybe one could be a coincidence, but they can't all have an overworked imagination. There must be some kind of. One of the mediums kind of went into this area in this photograph, but I don't really know, can't remember what it was about down that area there, Chris, but I don't see anything, I can't make any out of it.
Gary got it much bigger than that.
Yeah, I'm going to. Now, this was picked up.
Did we not decide that that was your granny?
Well, if the dress, I would say the style of dress would be Edwardian. That would be the kind of style, the length. You know.
You zoom back it again.
So where's her head again? Is her head up there?
No, head's there.
There it's there. It looks as if the face is looking down. Am I right, Chris?
Down the side,
Down the side.
Go back.
Go right.
When you do it, Chris, I'm your better than me and I can.
Is she going that way then?
She's coming.
Well, that's in the middle, isn't it? Aye.
So if we go back to this one, she's walking, I would say that she's walking that direction and with the face looking down. That could be a hat,
Right.
but that looks like an arm, and that definitely looks like an Edward. I would say that's definitely an Edwardian style.
Was there nothing there when the picture was taken?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Well, there's something that I haven't told Helen, is that she's got 2 or 3 pictures of mine. She's got my granny, my mother and my Uncle Harry. Now, my Uncle Harry was in the RAF, and he showed me a picture back in 1976, and it still frightens me to this day. And it's a picture of him with a whole lot of other people in the RAF taken in Canada. And said, see that person there? He's not there at all. He was not there in the original picture. And he's in the picture now. You were talking about somebody dying in a fire. It was him.
Did I remember I said to you that?
Yes. And looking at this, I said, you're kidding me.
See,
So you see that?
My uncle, sorry for interrupting, did not want to talk about the war. And that's one of the reasons.
Most of the men didn't.
Because they died horribly, a hell of a lot of them went in fire.
I sometimes can get a feeling of a symbol, and I can't always relate it. I sometimes say to John, I kind of feel this or I feel that. But I would only certain folk I would say that to again. So that's Daphne Plowman and that's John Plowman. That's the 2 people. They've both gone now, sadly. So going back to that, what's your version?
It definitely looks like, to me, it looks like somebody
walking towards.
Like that's the head there, shoulders, dress. That just looks to be. It does look like that. I don't think that's part of it. I think that's part of the tree. I think that looks like a head, and that's definitely looks like.
Do you think they're carrying something, or is that my imagination?
I'm not sure. It's hard to see.
I looked at it and I said, I wonder if that's my granny, because she would be dressed in that kind of Edwardian. If that's definitely looks like an Edwardian style.
Oh, I totally kind of like, just the kind of straight shoulder line and the way the dress is and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And there's me in my 40s. That'll see how long I've been at this damn thing. There's Ron at the back. God, I was about 42 or 43.
Is that up at
That's down at Broomhill, aye.
So it shows you how badly overgrown it was then.
Yep, that's me again, 40 odds. There's Ron, they're the 2 ones that landed up the tree.
Well, my brother Bob, who lives in Southampton, or as near as Dammit, and his pal Ian Roseweir, sadly no longer with us and used to be a member of our group, distinctly remember 2 steps going down in the kitchen and then a big slam. That would be 1958.
Yep.
But 1963 or 62 was when I was playing in there. I saw the same thing.
Right. Well, I know Elizabeth and I definitely found that in the kitchen area. And did I tell you one about my mother's father? He was very, very clever man, and he got friendly with one of the caretakers, and this caretaker said he hated to be in the house on his own at night. He felt really quite scared, and according to him, he told my grandfather that there was an opening in the kitchen area, steps going down, and there were stains on the steps that they could never get rid of these stains. And clocks used to go funny. Now, whether that's just an overworked imagination,
I think that is
stuck in
that is because they can get rid of blood easily enough. I've worked in a care home, I can tell you.
Now that's known as the Broomhill Lion. That stood outside the main entrance of the house. Eventually that went down to Morgan Glen, and now it's now in bits. But that's the connection to the
Lying in bits.
Lying in bits. That's the connection to the Stuarts, through the Hamiltons. Here's that photograph again.
So somebody took that. What was the
What was the story behind this photograph?
This one, I can't remember. It was taken. There's been so many times I've been down there, and I can't remember all the different dates and random photographs.
Aye.
I couldn't even tell you now who took this one.
Or why they took it.
Or why they took it. Again, that's us back to this. Whoever's that's this.
That's that Lindell thing again.
No, this is just this.
Another orb.
And I don't know whether that's an orb or just I think that's just part
I think that's just dust or
dust or
something.
something. I can't see that being anything. That's the house.
That's the house there.
Yep.
Right, where's the kitchen?
The kitchen's over here.
That's what I thought.
That's servants' quarters. That's the main drawing room. I'm sure that's the room I see.
That's the one I remember.
There's no drawings in the house anyway.
The answer to that is not that I've seen, and I've searched the architect's department, building control, and the planning department, and the answer is no, because it's too bloody old.
That's all that's left now, Chris, is a bit of this perimeter wall. That's the drawing room. The main entrance is side on round here. There was a billiard room, library, dining room, main bedrooms. That looks as if they've had balconies outside it. That'd be the servants' quarters up here. That's the kitchen area and the laundry area. That's been added on, obviously. You can see how it's all been added on a later date, but the kitchen area is...
Now, the original bit is what, that bit there?
I would think so, John. That could be the original part of what would be
the bit that was the tower house.
The tower house with the crazy staircase. Now, this is the bit where that orb that you thought was a definite orb, that's the area that was taken in here, down here. And I think that's the library that takes you through into the kitchen at the back. But there was a servants' passageway, so that the servants could go through the passageway and come through the main house, which would be.
And that is a phantom sheep.
Now this is the area that photograph was taken in. There's that tree again. I don't see anything in that bit.
I can see it. No, you know what? That's the. It looks like in there. So that's in it there, but that looks like the actual trunk of the tree.
Yep. And it's different. It's definitely different from the previous one.
Is it?
That'll be the same picture.
It's I don't know whether that's an older picture that'd be taking it when this house was still in its glory. That's it. Just another.
As discussed prior, it is quite an interesting story, and we will follow up with an on-site recording, which will tie back in with Helen and John and maybe Ron on that. But very, very interesting, and I'd just like to thank John and Helen for their time on the day, and also Helen for the lunch, as it was great. I mean, to meet them and stuff like that. So hope everybody's well, and I'll catch you all soon.